awards show into a political diatribe. That's right, the Oscars viewership plunged 20% to a record low, and movie fans who did watch the almost 4-hour broadcast were subjected to an endless torrent of political nonsense from host Jimmy Kimmel.
And wow, the stunning Lupita Nyong'o. She was born in Mexico and raised in Kenya. Let the tweet storm from the president's toilet begin.
None other than President Trump called Get Out the best first 3/4 of a movie this year. We don't make films like Call Me By Your Name for money. We make them to upset Mike Pence. If the last 2 years have taught us anything, it's that reality can be depressing. But tonight's nominated documentaries show us that where there is darkness, there is also hope, except at the White House. Hope quit on Wednesday.
And the stars joined in to promote all the usual liberal causes.
If you do win an Oscar tonight, we want you to give a speech, and we want you to say whatever you feel needs to be said. Speak from the heart. We want passion. If you want to encourage others to join the amazing students at Parkland at their march on the 24th, do that.
A land where dreamers live and freedom dwells. Immigrants get the benefits. We put up monuments for the feminists. Tell the NRA they in God's way.
Like everyone in this room and everyone watching at home, we are dreamers. Dreams are the foundation of Hollywood, and dreams are the foundation of America.
To all the dreamers out there, we stand with you.
The dreamers stand with them, but don't make the mistake of standing too close, otherwise they'll have to call security. On The View, Anna Navarro complained there actually weren't enough left-wing screens.
I actually was watching for more Trump jokes, more, NRA messages, more of that stuff. I can't stand Trump. I was actually disappointed. It kind of let me down.
Yeah, more Trump jokes, more NRA jokes, but all those movie awards somehow keep getting in the way. Joe Concha writes about media for The Hill, and he joins us. Joe, this was a ratings disaster. Why did they think it would be otherwise for them?
Well, we hear year after year that this is the lowest rated X event ever, right? It's been happening as a trend, sort of, and people sort of point to cord cutting, whereas, okay, I have this expensive cable package and I want to get rid of it and do streaming. So that's usually the excuse. But Mark, I mean, these numbers are devastating. Think about it. When 1 out of 5 people that watched last year say, I ain't going to watch this year. When you have a 20% drop, think about how many people 5 million is. You could fill Madison Square Garden, not far from here, 277 times. That's how many people didn't tune in. And I think, Mark, honestly, in the past, maybe some who identify as Republican, conservative, lean right, would give the show a chance and watch a little bit before they turned off. But now we're at a point, if you just talk to so many people who say voted for President Trump, they would say, you know what, I wasn't even going to give this a chance because I knew exactly what to expect, virtue signaling.
Yeah, and it's actually even more ridiculous this year, Joe, because with Harvey Weinstein and everything, we know that however bad the rest of the world may be when these pious Hollywood stars want to lecture us, their own industry is actually a toilet. So they were walking a kind of difficult tightrope between basically saying, we've cleaned up our act and we're here to tell you how cleaned up it is.
It seems they've lost the soapbox at this point, Mark. Hollywood, we got a problem. Whereas we saw everything would happen with, let's say, Weinstein or the Kevin Spaceys, and you go down the list in terms of people that are not in this industry anymore. And we never, I don't know if I heard the name Weinstein last night. We heard references to the Me Too movement, but as you said, they were walking a very fine line last night. And again, you can't put Humpty Dumpty back together. And in this case, I think many folks just knew what to expect when it came to a show like this and said, you know what, I'm not going to deal with it, and I'd rather watch something else, and that's a problem for Hollywood. Now, box office this year, Mark, receipts were down to their lowest level in 25 years. And I think, honestly, they're running out of ideas. How many prequels and sequels and remakes can we see? Let's start to see a couple more original types of movies. I loved Darkest Hour, don't get me wrong, but we've seen a lot of movies about Churchill before. Let's see some originality and stop the preaching so much, by the way.
Well, we didn't actually hear a lot about the movies. I mean, what was so weird about it was that, African-American actors would come out and talk about being African-American, and immigrant actors would come out and talk about being immigrants, and transgendered actresses would come out and talk about transgender. This is ridiculous. I can't imagine when Billy Wilder won an Oscar for The Apartment in whatever it was, 1959, he came out and said, well, as an Austro-Hungarian American, I know what it's like to be an immigrant. I don't think George Cukor, when he won for My Fair Lady, said, well, as a gay man, this is the kind of movie that, in other words, why do they not do what acting is supposed to be about, which is supposed to be great characters, great stories, instead of just doing this kind of lame-o identity politics?
Identity politics sums that up nicely, Mark. We saw a lot of diversity last night, and everybody celebrates diversity, and it's great. The only diversity that doesn't seem to be accepted at this point is diversity of thought, diversity of another kind of political opinion, because if that happens, we've seen it with folks before, you get blacklisted. But I think, honestly, from a political perspective, if, let's say, you're President Trump during the 2016 election, you didn't have almost any Hollywood support. I mean, you basically had Scott Baio, you had Chachi.
That's right.
And that was it. And trust me, Chachi was great in Happy Days. He even got a spin-off with the Joni Loves Chachi. But it was him and maybe Clint Eastwood, and I don't know, I really can't name anybody. Jimmy Woods, that's it.
No, I love that. The way the Republican Book of Hollywood Celebrities is a single sheet of paper, double space. That's what's great about the party. Joe Concha, thanks. Wendy Josefo is a Democrat strategist and professor of education at Johns Hopkins University. And Wendy joins us. Wendy, did you have a better time than Joe did at the Oscars last night?
I think I did, Mark, and I even came in wearing my Oscar earrings just for you. So,
oh, lovely.
Yeah.
Lovely. Delightful.
Thank you.
Do you want to name the designer?
No, thank you. I'll keep that to myself.
Okay. You can't seriously claim you enjoyed this show, can you? Because there was no show in it.
It was a show. I thought it was actually very entertaining. I think something that the Oscars has to do, though, moving forward is to curtail the time, because, 4 hours, is really just taking up a lot of time. But we had a lot of firsts here. We had Jordan Peele. He won an Oscar for original screenplay, the first for an African-American. We also saw Guillermo del Toro. He won for Best Movie, which is a great thing, especially since we've heard this pervasive narrative of Mexican immigrants, and we see that Mexican immigrants aren't rapists. They're not criminals. They're actually Oscar winners.
Oh, come on.
This was a good night, Mark.
No, come on, Wendy. You know as well as the great director of Singing in the Rain, Stanley Donen. He said to me a couple of years back, great movie stars are what orchid growers call sports. They're fabulous freaks. So you can have a great Mexican director, and you can have a great French composer, and you can have a great Canadian editor, and you can have a great Kenyan actress, and you can have a great Chilean transgender actress, and that doesn't tell you about whether you should have mass Chilean transgender immigration to the United States. All those things, if you're in the movie business, you're exceptional, and that doesn't tell you anything about anything.
No, but what it does tell us is that America is a beautiful melting pot, and we are not monolithic at all. We come from diverse backgrounds, and we're diverse people, and I think that that's what the Oscars shows us. And just to speak about the trends, I think this is really important, Mark. We cannot, put forth this commentary that says that the trends are really low now, but trends tie with box office hits. So when you have a movie that is nominated that is not necessarily a hit in the theaters, we see a downward trend in those people who watch the Oscars. We saw the same thing in 2008 when No Country for Old Men was leading with the Oscars.
No, that's not true this time.
Yes, it is true.
This fish movie, whatever it's called, The Shape of Water, where the chick dates the fish guy, that actually was a hit.
No,
I mean,
it only
don't
made-
ask me why, but it was a hit movie, and so people are interested to see whether it actually does win the Oscar.
That's not true, Mark. It only made $57.4 million, and when we put that in comparison to Black Panther, that's only been out for 3 weeks, that has made $900 million.
Yeah,
no, it's not a blockbuster hit. People actually want to go to Wakanda.
No,
that's what people want to do.
The Wakanda guy was on the show. Look, here's the problem, Wendy. You know, we had Ashley Judge talking about intersectionality, and then Frances McDormand wins Best Actress, and she talks about inclusion riders. And in the craziest sequel, she says the word inclusion riders, and the band plays That's Entertainment, and we've had no entertainment. We've had people talking about intersectionality and inclusion riders. Where's the entertainment?
The entertainment lies in us making sure that our actors, because they are taxpayers, get the right to say what it is they want like any other American citizen. We cannot stifle them, and we cannot say we do not want you guys to talk about inclusion riders. We don't want you guys to talk about being immigrants because we don't want to hear that. That's not fair to them. They are taxpayers just like us, so we have to decide.
Wait a minute. I'm a taxpayer. I don't have the right to bore millions of people by talking about intersectionality all night.
Because you choose not to, but you get to talk about things like this, and you get to voice your opinion. Everyone has that right. Whether they make millions of dollars or act on TV, it's still their right to be able to talk and critique.
You remember a couple of years ago, they always used to talk solemnly, piously, 1 billion people are watching around the world. Have you noticed they're not using that line anymore, Wendy?
Because at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter, per se, the numbers, because they know, as far as the Academy is concerned, it's a direct reflection of their lack of blockbusters when it comes to nominations. And that's the issue. In 1998, 44 million people watched the Oscars. You know why? The Titanic was nominated. Right. That was a blockbuster hit. So hopefully next year we will see blockbusters that are nominated so people can tune back in.
You sound an awful lot like that bit in the This Is Spinal Tap movie when they say the audience is becoming more selective. The audience slipped below 30 million. They're becoming mighty selective at the Academy Awards, Wendy.
They are becoming selective, but it's not for reasons that you think are political. It's only because the Oscars have to do a better job with their timing. They also have to do a better job with putting blockbusters up, and they also have to do a better job with putting forth awards that people want to see people achieve those awards, not just the little things.
Don't you think people are just bored by all this, you know, the first transgendered and the first woman and the first... We've had all the firsts. Why can't we just celebrate rare, exceptional talent?
We have not had all the firsts, and the fact that in 2018
we are then.
No, we have not, because the fact that in 2018 we're still celebrating first is a shame. It really is a shame. There's no reason that we should still be celebrating the first in 2018, the year of our Lord. That makes no sense, Mark.
Okay, Wendy. Well, I'll be interested to see what first they come up with next year. Thanks a lot, as always, Wendy.
Thank you, Mark.
Trump campaign aide has just been summoned by Robert Mueller's investigation, but he says the whole thing is such a sham. He ain't playing. He's refusing to appear. His very unique TV interviews and much more on that story straight ahead. A former Donald Trump campaign aide says special counsel Robert Mueller can take a hike. Sam Nunberg has been subpoenaed by Mueller's investigation, but in a series of wild interviews today, he said he's going to refuse to appear. On MSNBC, he ridiculed the entire idea of the investigation.
I'm not going to answer questions in front of a grand jury if they do not explain to me why I have to go in there. Because the idea that, once again, that Donald Trump colluded with Russia is a joke. Vladimir Putin is too smart to collude with Donald Trump. Donald Trump could keep his mouth shut if Putin colluded with him.
Yeah, he's letting it all hang out. That was a clip from his CNN interview. The great DeRoy Murdoch is with us, and nobody's heard of this Mr. Nunberg. He's basically a guy, I think he's about half the age of Donald Trump, who was who was briefly involved in the campaign and has now had a subpoena and has decided he's not going to play along.
Well, it's just, you know, it's Nunberg as in Catholic nun, not Nunberg like high noon.
Oh, sorry, it's like Like Devin Nunes, Sam
it's
Nunes.
also confusing. Look, he's a guy in town here in New York. He's got a law degree, practices as an attorney, happens to be a friend of mine.
Oh.
We're not very close, but I would describe Sam Nunberg as a friend of mine.
So you're next for the big subpoena.
Yeah, well, I thought about calling him today in the middle of all this. And I literally seriously thought, well, if I call him, who knows if I'll get sucked into this giant Bob Mueller whirlpool. It just seems to get bigger and bigger as it moves away and further and away from Russia.
Well, look, he's got a point here because, for a start, I mean, I regard federal justice as essentially a racket. They convict 97% of the people they drag into court, which is a percentage that Saddam Hussein and Kim Jong-un would envy. So they're basically saying to you, roll over for us or we're going to destroy your life. So this guy is either looking at 120 years in jail or he'll be sleeping in a dumpster around the back of the freight yards. I mean, there's something actually admirable in telling Mueller to go stuff it, isn't there?
Look, I do believe if you're subpoenaed, you really should show up. I mean, that's part of the justice system. But when you talk about a 97% conviction rate, that's not a nicely balanced scales of justice. They're about like so. That's one problem. Another is that these folks who get brought in for these discussions brought up to the Capitol Hill for hearings, they bring lawyers in, and it costs a lot of money.
Right.
And if Sam Nunberg has any sense, he'll go down there with an attorney, and it's going to cost him a lot of money. I've got a friend of mine who literally has had to tap into his children's college fund in order to pay the legal bills required for him to go and sensibly testify on Capitol Hill on all of this. And we talk on the phone, and he's quite distraught about the huge expense he's faced just to testify. He's not even indicted or anything.
But isn't that what's outrageous about this? Because let's say you have one lawyer or two lawyers or five lawyers. The federal government, Bob Mueller, has 105 lawyers. And so you can't compete on that.
And if they run out of money, they can print more money. I don't know any law firm in America that prints its own cash. The Department of Justice does.
No.
Yeah, you're talking about essentially infinite resources. Exactly.
Now we've just heard today, again just in the last couple of hours, that Mueller's now suddenly investigating not just Trump's collusion with Russia, but apparently potentially with other countries too. He's apparently met with a guy from Lebanon and a guy from the United Arab Emirates. He may have been colluding with Belgium all this time and just using the collusion with Russia as a front for his collusion with Belgium.
Well, that's right. And I'm American, you're Canadian, I believe, so I guess we're colluding. Right. So maybe we should leave the studio now while we still can. Look, this is insane.
You're not allowed to collude with Canadians. In Canada, we can collude with you, but you can't collude with me.
That's not very fair, is it? Look, this started off as an investigation of Trump and Russian collusion. They found no evidence of this after 18 years. And what amazes me is that Mueller is so busy trying to find something that doesn't exist, or at least is not heretofore. And yet you have massive collusion on the part of the Democrats and the Russians, and he's not interested in looking at that.
Yeah, you put it this way at the top of your column. You say, here's Mueller and the fire department. They've taken the axe and they've broken down the front door, and they're looking for a tipped-over candle in the Trump house, whereas right next door, the Democrat house is aflame with Russian.
Yeah, burning to the ground, exactly. Yeah. And just a couple of examples. Obviously, you had the Russian reset. That's a collusion of a sort. Hillary Clinton, of course, had the Uranium One deal, which she basically approved. In exchange for that transfer of 20% of U.S. uranium supply to the Kremlin, a donation of $145 million to the Clinton Foundation.
Now, why don't any of Hillary's aides have to turn over all their emails the way like this poor Nunberg guy?
It strikes me as amazing that not only are there no indictments, Mueller's not even asked the question. You have a Boeing deal where Hillary got involved with basically brokering a deal to get 50 737s sold to the Kremlin to Aeroflot. All of a sudden, Boeing gives $900,000 to the Clinton Foundation. Then there's something called Skokolvo, which is sort of like the Silicon Valley of Moscow. She helped all these American companies go over there, take a look. Those companies signed up. They, in turn, gave at least $6.5 million to the Clinton Foundation. And later we find out from the Pentagon that whole thing was a scam designed to espionage and steal American technology. No questions, no interviews, no discussion, no nothing. The woman should be locked up.
And hopefully help the Russians break into the Democratic National Committee, use the technology.
Lock her up now as much as ever before.
Okay, great. Lock her up, says Leroy Miner. Always great to see you. Thanks a lot. Delta just did some virtue signaling by attacking the NRA, and now they're paying an 8-figure price, courtesy of the government of Georgia. Georgia's Lieutenant Governor joins us next on Tucker Carlson Tonight. Delta Airlines is learning the hard way that virtue signaling can have consequences. Following the Parkland shooting, Delta abolished an NRA discount that had only been used on 13 air tickets. In response, though, Georgia's legislature killed a $40 million tax break the company had enjoyed. Georgia Lieutenant Governor Casey Cagle is running for governor and helped lead the charge to strip the tax break. He joins us tonight. Lieutenant Governor, you said you're sick of conservatives getting kicked around by companies in this way.
Well, Mark, it's good to be with you tonight, and you're exactly right. This was in the context of a much larger tax cut that Georgia citizens were going to receive, both individuals but companies and corporations of our state. Delta was part of that. But because they chose to target and be a part of the boycott, that really targeted NRA and law-abiding citizens across our state. That particular tax cut that was specific to them, which was an exemption on their jet fuel, was removed from the legislation.
Now, I take it they saw, a couple of tweets or whatever it was that said you need to disassociate yourself from the NRA. In a sense, there's something really unpleasant going on here because, as you said, these are law-abiding citizens who are members of the NRA, and yet somehow the left is trying to saddle them with the blame for the Parkland shooting, and American companies seem to be going along with it.
Well, I don't think conservatives are to blame. And if it's not the Second Amendment today, then it might be the First Amendment tomorrow. And we do have to stand up and fight and push back and do it in a very respectful way. And this was our opportunity. And I want to put it in context. I mean, Delta is the largest employer in our state. They are a tremendous asset, an economic asset. But on the same token, we see time and time again that companies are wanting to weigh into the social discussion. And listen, I've been a small businessman, both small and large, for 32 years. And I always recognized, like Warren Buffett, that I didn't let my political views necessarily get in the way of my shareholders. And I think it's best when companies get back to focusing on making money and selling seats. And let's not forget, with the NRA in particular, Delta negotiated a deal in selling seats, no different than hotels would negotiate with a convention to sell out the entire hotel, and you give a discount for that. This was very targeted, and obviously it was not something that I appreciated, and obviously expressed that very clearly.
Have you heard from Delta?
I have. Delta, as I said, they are a big piece of our economy. We have the world's busiest airport in Atlanta, Hartsfield-Jackson Airport. Delta has a tremendous presence there. And we have seen some late news from Delta as well that has reaffirmed its commitment for the Second Amendment. And I think that's very positive. And I want to say, listen, every family member has disagreements. And Delta is families, family here in Georgia, and we'll continue to fight together. But on issues like the Constitution and law-abiding citizens, we have to push back, and that's exactly what we did. And I think it's having a tremendous impact.
Okay, well, good for you for doing that, Lieutenant Governor, and we'll see how that continues. Mark Glaze is co-founder of the gun control group Guns Down. He joins us. Mark, we've seen some interesting news in regard to the Parkland shooting, that in fact this was not done with any rapid-fire semi-automatic, but in fact this was done with a far more restricted form of ammunition.
Well, I think what we've been hearing is that he may not have had the highest capacity magazines. That may be true. If it's in fact the case, that puts him in a very small minority of mass shooters. Usually it's high capacity magazines that make mass shootings mass. And even so, recall, even if he had a 10 bullet ammunition magazine, he was still able to slaughter 17 kids, which tells you assault weapons should not be in the hands of kids like this.
Don't you think, though, that what's been clear since this happened is that this gun control issue is actually going nowhere, because people understand that in fact it was a failure of government, that you had a sheriff's deputy stationed at the school who did nothing, who in fact decided to stay outside until the gunman had finished killing everybody. that you have a federal government that in fact incentivizes ignoring so-called problem adolescents and problem teenagers according to which preferred identity groups they belong to. So that what appears to your group to be a gun control issue is in fact a story of lavish government failure from federal to local.
Well, look, if you have a better idea for how we can find every deeply troubled teen who should not have access to firearms, I think almost everybody in this country, including all 535 members of Congress, would love to hear about it.
No, just wait a minute on this, Mark, because the issue here is not whether there's a better idea, but it's the fact that the failure of government. Right? I mean, this is absurd. You've got a sheriff's deputy in a schoolhouse, which would be a thing that would seem nuts back when you or I were at school, and he does nothing. So why should people, when you're paying for a guy, an armed sheriff's deputy, to be at a schoolhouse all day long and he does nothing, why would any prudent person want to mortgage their safety to the government?
Sure, I agree that that guy should have been fired yesterday. I'm sorry he hasn't. But that's not usually the case. Whether there is security or isn't security, whether they do their jobs or not, mass shooters go into schools and all kinds of public places and they do mass shootings because they outarm whoever happens to be there. That's how mass shootings happen.
No. We're talking about the most recent run of mass shootings. And the issue here is that when Americans see the systemic failure that went on in Parkland, when they see that the sheriff has engaged in a campaign of disinformation designed to deflect his failures onto peripheral targets like the NRA. It's understandable, isn't it, that they don't want to mortgage their personal security to an incompetent government.
I don't, because what happened here was an exception. I agree this guy seems like a bad guy. I'd be happy to see him fired again, like I said yesterday. But think about the Newtown mass shooting. I mean, there was armed security there. They were in the school. They were unable to stop a guy who came in, who radically overarmed them, and who intended to die in whatever happened next. I mean, that is the much more usual situation. Has nothing to do with government failure. Has to do with the fact that there are 300 million guns on the streets of America, and the NRA's only solution is to put 400 million out there.
Well, but what's your solution to get the 300 million down? I mean, I don't understand, because when people talk about the Australian example and other examples, there weren't 300 million guns in Australia. How do you propose to get that down to 200 million, for example?
Well, I think an excellent place to start is to stop putting new stock out there. I think the easiest thing to do, and probably the most effective, because we've done it in places like Colorado, where there are actually a lot of guns and a lot of hunters, is to ban high-capacity magazines. You would then at least limit the damage that some of these shooters can do. I think a second step is to ban the civilian use of assault rifles. First step is to stop putting new ones out on the street. Then you either wait a very long period of time until the ones that are out there degrade, or you do voluntary buybacks, or you do compulsory buybacks, or some combination of the above.
What about the most disturbing aspect of the shooter in Florida, though, which is the idea of government programs that in fact incentivize ignoring problem teenagers according to whether they happen to be Hispanic or African American or whatever fashionable identity group tickles the bean counter's fancy next?
If there was such a program, I'm not aware of it. If there was, there shouldn't be. I think that there should be, I agree with you, I think that there should be more government spending, that there should be more private spending where possible to track down kids who have legitimate, emotional and mental disturbances and get them rooted into treatment so this kind of thing doesn't happen.
Where do you stand on this boycotting the NRA?
Oh, I think it's a great thing. Look, folks at the NRA...
There's 5 million members of the NRA. Well, how many members are there of your group?
There's some debate about how many members the NRA actually has, but here's where the NRA
Well, it's
and
millions, though, isn't it?
Yeah, it's probably millions. Look, the NRA says often, and I happen to agree, that politics is downstream from culture. Yeah. So when you have companies like Dick's Sporting Goods saying we're no longer going to do business with the NRA...
How can you marginalize extreme a group that is many million times bigger than yours? Aren't you the fringe group?
Well, they've been around since the 1800s, so I think we're going to take a while to catch up.
Okay, well, let us know when you do. Mark, thanks very much. Google is silencing a conservative voice on YouTube. Will they come for you next? Tucker and Dennis Prager We'll discuss that coming up on Tucker Carlson Tonight.
That lawsuit is ongoing. Dennis Prager joins us tonight. Dennis, thanks for coming on.
Always good to be with you, Tucker.
So we've been following your suit, both out of affection for you, but because we think it has larger implications. Why is this important beyond just the suit itself?
The internet is largely controlled in terms of information by Google, which also uses and runs YouTube.
Yes.
So if they don't allow a free flow of information, it would be as if, I don't know, to make an odd analogy, your airport said only people on the left can fly airplanes, can be passengers on airplanes. That would be an equivalent. That is what is now happening. Our lawsuit is so much bigger than us. It's big in and of itself. We had 600 million views last year, and that's probably why YouTube is not a big fan of ours, because we really are effective. We have 4 Pulitzer Prize winners, and we have professors from Stanford, Harvard, Yale, giving courses, these 5-minute courses. They're very effective. They present a side of life that is never heard or almost never heard on our campuses. So they have decided that they will put, in this case, 40 of our 300 videos on the restricted list, meaning it's joins pornography and violence being restricted. So, for example, we had a video by Victor Davis Hanson, who, if you know, is the opposite of a flamethrower.
Yes.
He is about as even-tempered a professor as exists in the world. And he gave a thought, why did we fight in Korea? That was on the restricted list. After a big battle, it's back on. Alan Dershowitz is a liberal. He gave a course titled "The Legal Founding of Israel." That's on the restricted list.
So are you convinced, after going through this long process and digging into the suit, that Google's motives are ideological?
There is no other possibility. We have videos on the exact same subjects as liberal and left-wing videos. They're never censored, and ours is. But here, by the way, is an amazing proof that is very recent and not something I could have told you the last time I was on your show. I debated a man from the left at a synagogue in San Francisco a couple of months ago, and that was put on the internet. They have put that on a restricted list. A debate in a synagogue known for pornography and violence, needless to say. Apparently, they feel that I did better than the man on the left, and so they have put that on the restricted list. It's transparently ideological.
And are you convinced, and I'm sure you've gathered data on this, that they're doing this to a greater extent to sites on the right than they are to sites on the left?
Yeah, there's no question about it, and our lawsuit provides a chapter and verse on precisely that. There's no question about that.
Well, this is frightening then. I mean, this is the portal through which our information comes. Yeah.
I'm sorry, say it again?
Well, I was just saying, well, this is, I mean, Google, YouTube, I mean, these are the ways that people understand reality. And so if someone's got his thumb on the scale, then you're not getting all the information you need to make up your own mind.
Right. That's why this lawsuit is important in and of itself, and it is important for another equally important reason, the court of public opinion. We need to say, or Google needs to say, to be more precisely, Google needs to say, the truth is we are not a conduit for free expression. We are here to, in fact, promote our views that are on the left.
Yes.
So either we'll get a win or we'll get honesty, and either way it's a win.
It is a win, and of course we're hoping for your victory. Dennis Prager, thanks a lot for explaining that to us, and I appreciate it.
Thanks, Tucker.
I hope Dennis has a good lawyer, because that's actually quite a subtle needle his legal team will have to thread there. San Francisco is spending millions to defend illegal immigrants while needles and homeless tents fill the streets. How does that even begin to resemble sanity? That's next on Tucker Carlson Tonight. San Francisco has announced its priorities, and they aren't its own citizens. Drug needles, feces, and trash are piling up in the streets, but the city has managed to set aside more than $7 million to give lawyers for illegal immigrants facing deportation, and they plan to spend millions more. Meanwhile, today marks the expiration date that President Trump set for DACA. But the program remains in force thanks to activist judges who claim it's illegal to end a program that's illegal in the first place. You know it makes sense. Ali Noorani is executive director at the National Immigration Forum, and he joins us. Ali, why is this a priority for the government of San Francisco?
Well, we do a lot of work with law enforcement across the country, and whether it's San Francisco, St. Louis, or Spartanburg, the local cop on the corner wants to be able to do their job to serve and protect everybody in their community. And what that means is that they don't want to be policing a sanctuary city, rather they would be policing a safe city. At the end of the day, that requires that the undocumented and the documented immigrant community must trust local police. This tension that you have between local police and ICE is actually undermining what local police would like to do. And that, at the end of the day, is serving and protecting everybody.
That's a familiar argument from immigration activists, that somehow if you enforce the law, it discourages illegal immigrants from cooperating with police departments. But, for example, in this hall in California, I think they rounded up 230 undocumented immigrants, of which exactly half had been convicted of serious crimes, including child sex crimes, assault, and weapons charges. Why would anyone wish to keep those people illegally in the United States?
What you just talked about, Mark, there is the right way to spend valuable law enforcement resources, to go after the public safety threats. But you said that was half of the 232. I'm not a math major, but that means that half of the people that they detained were not public safety threats. That, at the end of the day, is a public safety. Well, they're illegal immigrants. That, at the end of the day, is a waste of public resources and pushes immigrants who are victims of crimes, witnesses to crimes, away from local law enforcement.
No, Ali, it pushes illegal immigrants. I mean, if you don't mind, as a legal immigrant, I get a bit concerned at the way that term gets applied to people who did what I didn't do, which is just walk into the country.
So there's another interesting fact with all this, Mark, is that the majority of immigrant families are mixed status. That means that somebody in the household is documented, the other person may be undocumented. So if that person who's documented does not trust local law enforcement because they're worried that the cop is going to ask their wife for their immigration status, they're not going to report that crime. They don't want to tear up their family. So this is more complicated than just a pure black and white issue. That's why we need local law enforcement to be able to...
Bringing it to local law enforcement means is that Democrat cities will become playgrounds for illegal immigrants, when immigration is what we can argue about whether certain areas of government are the province of the federal or the state or the local government. But one thing that's indisputable is that the nation's borders and who is admitted to live among American citizens is the sole responsibility of the federal government.
As an immigrant, you have done a great job of reading and memorizing the Constitution. You're absolutely correct. But what's missing here, Mark, is cooperation and collaboration between federal immigration enforcement and local law enforcement. So when ICE comes in and knocks on a door and says police, and they start asking everybody for immigration status, that immigrant community, documented or not, thinks it's the local police who is profiling the entirety of the community. That's why we want immigration enforcement to prioritize their resources on public safety threats.
Well, you say cooperation. We now actively have subversion, where mayors are in fact tipping off criminal elements to the fact that federal authorities are going to be staging raids. Do you approve of that?
I think that what we need to be doing in a state like California, which is the 6th largest economy in the world, not just the country, in the world, we need to make sure that the entirety of the state is safe and secure. That means that ICE should be, again, prioritizing their resources.
Wait a minute, Ali. These are all great-sounding words, safe and secure. But you know,
do you have a problem with safety and security?
Well, I do when they're euphemisms for what is in fact industrial-scale law-breaking. But I don't like, and I actually do have a problem with the co-option of all the nice-sounding words for criminality, which is what this is.
But I just agreed with you, Mark, when I said that we should be prioritizing public safety threats such as child predators. Did we agree? Correct?